Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad. Tehami. Pakistan's and China's leadership have renewed their commitment for the success of China-Pakistan economic corridor, and they have also expressed the desire to further enhance the cooperation in information technology, economy, agriculture, and human resource development. This particular commitment came when the Chinese Vice Foreign Minister, Mr. Sun Weidong, had meetings with the top leadership of Pakistan, including the President, the caretaker Prime Minister, the caretaker Foreign Minister, as well as Chief of Army Staff, General Syed Asim Munir. Now, as we all know, that the first phase of the China-Pakistan economic corridor was primarily focused on infrastructure and energy projects. When you talk about the second phase or the revitalization of China-Pakistan economic corridor, it basically focuses on agriculture, IT, and human resource development, to mention a few key areas under it. Also, when we talk about Pakistan's authorities' initiatives in order to stabilize the economy, it has been launching gigantic projects for the export-oriented investments, and the Special Investment Facilitation Council happens to be one of those gigantic initiatives which primarily focuses on key areas that include agriculture, livestock, information technology, mines and minerals, energy, and defense production. In today's program, we are going to take stock of these two gigantic projects, especially the second phase of the China-Pakistan economic corridor, as well as the Special Investment Facilitation Council, how these are already stabilizing the country's economy, and how the country's economy can thrive in future under such gigantic projects. Also, authorities in Pakistan seem determined to restructure the Federal Board of Revenue. Now, how important this particular restructuring is, and what measures have already been taken in this regard, and what else is required to be done in this particular regard for the restructuring and rationalizing of the Federal Board of Revenue. Also, in a major development today, we saw that Pakistan's stock exchange gained over 500 points, with KSE 100 index closing at 64,454.22 points. We'll also get the analyst view regarding this particular development as to what triggered this particular gain at the Pakistan Stock Exchange today in particular. All these aspects are for discussion in today's Views on News. For that, we are honored to have been joined in the studio by Mr. Ali Salman, happens to be an economist. Mr. Salman, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, Memeber Task Force on FBR and Tax Reforms. Dr. Ahmad, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. At the same time, on Skype, we are honored to have been joined by Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, former advisor at the Ministry of Finance. Dr. Najeeb, thank you very much for your time, also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. If both of you gentlemen allow me, let me begin the discussion with Dr. Khaqan Najeeb. Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, now when we specifically talk about the China-Pakistan economic corridor, as we all know, primarily it focused on infrastructure and energy projects. So when we talk about the revitalization of CPEC, how bigger a potential does it carry when we specifically talk about the key areas it focuses on that include agriculture, IT, and human resource development? Dr. Najeeb, I seek your pardon for the interjection. If you could kindly unmute yourself.
So Jawad, if you look at the history of CPEC, when CPEC started, our infrastructure needs, especially on the energy, were of course, dire. So we took a lot of projects that were ongoing and made them a part of the CPEC menu, so that we could fast track them, we could push them, we could get the kind of money that was needed. So, I remember in 13 to 18, we used to say that, Pakistan kind of added 10, 11,000 megawatt of power under the CPEC power projects. All in all, if I remember correctly, till now, we have about $25 billion that have come in terms of the CPEC 1, so as to say, which is the infrastructure work. CPEC 2, on the other hand, has not taken off as it should have. We have 9 special economic zones. We have a special technology zone. Out of the 9, if again memory serves right, I think 1 is fully functional. The others are, somewhere trying to get functional. So our second phase of industrialization hasn't happened. In fact, Pakistan's deindustrialized in a sense. If you look at Pakistan's industry as a percentage of its GDP, our manufacturing, it's come down to about 12.4%. It used to be 15, 16 a few years ago. If you look at Pakistan's investment to GDP now stands at about 14% in FY23. Go back 2008, it used to be about 18%. Similarly, if you look at Pakistan's export performance, our export to GDP is somewhere around 8 9%. It used to be 13% back in 2005. So, in a sense, Pakistan's deindustrialized prematurely. Pakistan's exports, which are the major issue rather than, the imports, we always talk more on that sense. So, we haven't been able to do so. Similarly,
Dr. Najeeb, you already mentioned that when you specifically talk about the special economic zones, 1 out of 9, you already mentioned is fully functional. What were those reasons, what were those causes that actually led the rest of the 8 special economic zones couldn't get through at the pace of that particular one that you've just mentioned? Unfortunately, I think we've lost the connection with Dr. Najeeb, but we'll try to reconnect as soon as we reconnect with him. We'll go to him with the same question. Mr. Ali, and now basically when we talk about the first phase of the CPAC, now as Dr. Najeeb already mentioned that it's only one special economic zone that has been fully operational up till now. The main causes for the rest, they couldn't become fully operational as well.
Well, first of all, I think after a very comprehensive introduction which we heard from Dr. Khaqan, I would like to add that the industrialization or industrial progress is not just a function of creation of new economic zones. It is correct that there are 9 economic zones under progress and some business activity is happening, but then this industrial activity is also dependent on the productivity, on labor force, on the quality of the economic management, the bureaucracy, the incentives for the taxation, the incentives available for the investors. So creation of zone as a part of the CPAC phase 2 is one thing, but then kick-starting the industrial activity, looking at the the interlinkages of the products or manufacturers with international demand is totally another thing. So it's not possible that the inaugurals of zone or industrial zones can kickstart industrial activity. I'll just give you a small example. I was recently in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and I was given a briefing by a sitting caretaker minister. And according to that information, the Rashaka zone, for instance, has been it's complete in terms of the physical infrastructure. And there are also the factories are there in terms of at least the physical infrastructure, but they have not commenced the operation. Why? Because they needed a connection with the electricity, with the distribution system, and due to a very complex system of transmission, of distribution, inefficiencies also, they have not obtained so far, and almost 6 months have passed. And so there are these very micro-institutional linkages, hurdles, which actually become an obstacle in fast tracking of these projects. And this has been expressed many times by the Chinese side over the last few years, particularly I think after 2018 onwards, the speed on the progress on the industrial zones.
What is required to increase that particular speed?
Well,
as I said,
the industrial zones have to operate as a part of a larger industrial policy, and there is no industrial policy at the moment. So the country is operating without an industrial policy for a long time. So we need a competitive, forward-looking, a modern industrial policy, and zone will become just a part of that. We need to bring in the investment policy, which gives incentive. We need to also look at the interest rate, for instance. So there are so many factors which would affect.
So when you specifically talk about the investment policy, I mean the special investment facilitation council, in order to attract that investment, how can those two things be connected
Sure,
with each other?
it's a great question. You see, SIFC was precisely created because the Board of Investment failed to deliver. It could not raise the investment, as Dr. Khaqan rightly noted. Our investment to GDP ratio has decreased tremendously, significantly last few years. It means that the Board of Investment has not delivered the goal. So SIFC was created, first of all, primarily to bridge that gap, bringing foreign investment, providing them confidence in Pakistan business environment, in Pakistani institutions. And I think to some extent, it is playing a positive role as far as the institutional hurdles is concerned. And there are, I think, few examples where we can talk about that how, for instance, SIFC has pushed the regulation, has eased the hurdles. But again, they are not coming from a policy perspective. They are largely coming from an administrative efficiency perspective, which is still useful. I'm not saying it's not useful. But I think that the bottleneck the example which I provided you in the earlier statement, this is a classical test case for a body like SIFC. There will be some movement, there will be some meeting, and that problem will be solved, I'm sure, in a matter of few days. But unfortunately, our current administrative structure has failed to deliver that.
So I'll come back to take your detailed view regarding the possible contours of when you talk about the industrial policy that should be competitive and modern looking. Dr. Ahmad, now talking about the CPEC phase 1, what have been the major successes under that particular phase 1, and where do you think both countries, Pakistan and China, can actually focus when it comes to the revitalization, the second phase of it?
Okay. Salient features of phase 1. I think, despite a lot of negative propaganda, etc., I think it was quite a success. Let me recount a few things. First, they invested something like more than $25 billion were invested that period. See, they were able to add something like 6,000 megawatts to electric generation to the grid. And then the transmission lines, I think another 1,000 kilometers was rehabilitated and refurbished and put up. Then we have several highways across the country and perhaps more than 500 kilometers. You see, you travel anywhere in Pakistan, there's a CPEC highway, and it has cut down the time by half almost in various places. So, if you recall, and we all recall 2013-14, before CPEC came, there would be, I don't know about this studio, but everywhere you're in a meeting, in hotel or anything, electricity will go, there'll be generators all around your neighbors, etc. Everybody will be generators, and all that is gone. So those are the success areas. Unfortunately, the second phase, which should have picked up around 2018-19, got a little bit delayed, mostly because of COVID and change of government, etc. And some other, and also there was a lot of this thing about Pakistan piling up too much debt, etc. So that got delayed. But it's good to see that the Chinese Vice Minister here coming up, renewing the second phase, because the second phase builds up on the first phase. First phase was more about communications, about energy, etc. Second phase is more about industrial production. You just spoke about special economic zones, and then agriculture productivity, and such things. More production, etc. on that. And I think it's good that they're renewing their commitment.
Right. Dr. Ahmad, I see your part of the injection over here. We once again reconnected to Dr. Khaqan Najeeb. I'll come back to you to take your understanding regarding the second, as you have recounted some of the major successes of the CPEC phase 1, and what potential does the second phase carry with itself. Now, Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, please go ahead. Unfortunately, we lost the connection. You already mentioned that there's only one special economic zone that has been fully functional up till now. What about the rest of the 8 out of 9? Do you see any sort of major hurdles that actually cause some sort of a delay in their timely operationalization, and what's required to increase that pace?
So as the others were also showing, so you need a whole ambiance in the country, right? Starting from an investment policy to an SME policy being implemented, the hurdles being removed. Rightly, BOI was created for that matter. Now we've moved on to a higher body, the SIFC. Even the signaling. So, if we were to, chalk the steps of getting industrialization back into the country, one, you remove the hurdles. So it's very difficult to do so. So you bypass through the SIFC mechanism. And that's something we've always tried to do in many areas. So I think SIFC is signaling both domestically. I think the thought is that it's mostly outside. I think they're signaling locally also through corporate farming, trying to reach people within the country also. Then the mines and minerals potential, and then the privatization potential. So all this is part of the ambiance that you want to create in terms of getting investment jacked up, not only domestic, but also international. And then public sector investment, which also has gone down tremendously in Pakistan because our PSDP has shrunk as a percentage of GDP and in nominal numbers as well. So that, investment is not a good story. All the countries that have done well in the world have had 25 to 35% in terms of investment to GDP ratios that they've run, whether it's India, Bangladesh, East Asia, whoever you look at. So I think in that regard, bringing investment center stage itself is very important. Now, can we follow all these things through with the new setup? I think we need to. I mean, do we have an option? I don't think we have much of an option. These things need to be done, but within that framework, we need to do our regulatory cleanup that will take a few years. We've done some work. In the middle, in the medium time, we can use SIFC as a mechanism. Then, to get really investment excited, we also have to see that this investment can't be, a bottler coming into Pakistan, finding Pakistani water, selling it to Pakistanis and taking the dividends out. FDI has to be really thought through. Pakistan's FDI now has to, primarily focus on increasing Pakistan's productivity, whether it's in agriculture, whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's the capability of our SMEs, and primarily related to exports. So that depth has to be seen by SIFC now, because that is the institution which is managing this. So let's hope that in the coming next 2 to 5 years, we can not only see some re-regulation, but we can see an outward-looking industrial sector of Pakistan, which moves beyond, the 8% of export that we have, which sorts out the issues of tariff and exchange rate policy, which reduces the anti-export bias that we have in our country, which aligns the incentives, the fiscal incentives also, to productive sectors very easily. You don't tax real estate, which is the most unproductive sector, but you want to tax manufacturing. You want to put in super taxes on the banking sector. So you have to really start thinking about it. Then the last thing that I would say, there are, I think, 80,000 large entities in Pakistan in terms of the commercial and industrial entities. They have a voice. But then there are 5.2 million SMEs which have not had a voice. When I was at Finance Ministry, all the big boys would always come and see me. But the guys who were the backbone could never find the resources or could never, get in touch with us the way they should have. And I regret, that kind of thing. So SMEs zero in on the value addition that you can do with them to make them technologically, the financial intermediation. Let me give you another figure. I like to work with figures. So we have 5.2 million SMEs, Jawad. You will be surprised that only 167,000 out of those SMEs have access to finance, which is formal. So, our financial intermediation is weak. Of course, the large sector takes most of our financing. If you put all these things together, and especially the weakness in our agri markets, our agri R&D, our agri, farm to market logistics, that's where all the improvements must come through. That's
So
the
how
hard agenda.
those particular weaknesses in agri sector, these two particular things that you've just mentioned, how those could be overcome? Where to start from?
there is an initiative that the government has taken. It is called, land information management systems. So agriculture is being helped by these folks. A team has been set up. I think they're based in Rawalpindi. And so they are trying to connect to the agriculture farmer to upgrade his or her technology, to help him or her with the weather patterns, with the soil quality. And they're using a lot of the establishment work, because the establishment's got the drones which can help them with these kind of things and the technology. So that's one thing that's happening. Then we must jack up our agriculture R&D spending on the areas of agri universities and the Pakistan Agriculture Research Council. If it's not working, let's close it. If we want to make it work, let's put the human resource and the kind of research that is needed there. So then corporate farming and getting our farmer connected internationally, so that they can also benefit from the technologies in the world. Then on our side, the legislative work on the seed, I think it takes a lot of time to get seed through in Pakistan. So that's another area that is the federal mandate, probably, which they have to see how they can improve in terms of getting the seed improvement in Pakistan, the quality of the fertilizer that is available. So a host of things can be done. But agriculture in terms of productivity, and I'm going to put something new today. I'm an Australian trained economist. So they think that being part of the global value chain doesn't only mean that you sell parts to Apple and Mercedes. They think that selling a lot of wheat to Indonesia, and from which they make noodles and rice, and then export it further, is also being part of a global value chain. So agriculture also has to start thinking in those kinds of terms. Now these are the innovative works that are required, and I really hope that LIMS could take this work forward, and the potential of Pakistan's productivity in every sector would be jacked up, and that's where the real growth would come in the economy.
Right, Dr. Najeeb, when we talk about Pakistan taking the advantage from the Chinese experience, in particular, when we talk about the second phase of the CPAC, and agriculture happens to be one of the key areas under that also. So specifically talking about the research and development, how important and crucial is that exchange of expertise and knowledge when it comes to the bilateral cooperation between Pakistan and China in this particular field?
Of course, China has learned from the world and improved itself. Lots of Chinese people went abroad, studied, came back, played a major role. Now, can that transfer of technology happen in Pakistan? That's why I keep saying FDI is not only money. FDI is a lot of technological transfer. FDI is a lot of managerial transfer, a lot of sense. And then I also say this, we may not be able to trade on the East, but from China, Iran, car countries are trading partners which should be used. So that's another thing we must be negotiating with the Chinese to become part of their global value chain. It's a big market. It's a market to which a lot of global chains from Vietnam became a part of it. So that's something that we must be looking at.
Dr. Khaqan Najeeb, former advisor of the Ministry of Finance, joining us on Skype. Thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Ali, going back to the same thing, the industrial policy, you were of the view that we don't have that policy so far. What could be the possible contours of a competitive and a modern-looking industrial policy?
So I think, to me, it seems that like five important pillars of industrial policy we can define. First of all is the taxes and tariff structure. We are sitting with Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, and he will speak a lot on that. But currently our taxation structure and tariff structure is anti-export bias and anti-industry bias. About 78% to 80% perhaps of our income tax burden falls on the manufacturers. Right? So we need to replace that taxation structure with a uniform and broad-based taxation structure, but lowering the rates also. Secondly, the access to capital is important, and access to capital not just for large players, but also for the SMEs. Thirdly, the quality of human development, the skills. Although we have TEFTAs everywhere, but we are still not producing the skills which are required by the industry. There is a significant supply and demand gap there. So industry needs more skills than we are producing. Fourthly, the development of organically developing clusters. You see, all around the world, the industries grow in clusters. So, and this is not something you can create artificially. You have to invest in existing in clusters through better infrastructure, for instance, through CPAC and other measures. And last but not the least is the regulation. So, for instance, we created export processing zone in 1980s, but then we forgot to review and revise their regulation. So, these are the 5 important pillars of the industrial policy. There could be more, but to me, these are the more important one. And we need to, bring out changes on all these contours if we want to benefit from the industrial zones which are being created. Otherwise, these industrial zones may not deliver the result. I'll just give you a small fact. Export processing zone in Pakistan, there are many of them, about 40 years, but their total contribution in the exports is less than 3%. So with that, even if you create new 9 or 10 zones, they're not going to add a lot to the productivity.
Right, Dr. Ahmad, now these 5 major pillars that have been mentioned by Mr. Ali. Now, the first and the foremost, the tax and the tariff structure. He's of the view that it's anti-industry biased and we should actually, broad-based structure should be in place. What's your take regarding that?
Yeah, I mean, that's, I fully agree and share his views. And in fact, whatever, even the government studies, maybe the World Bank has been saying this for a long time and IMF, etc. But if you look at the government studies, the more recent ones, one was this Pakistan's national tariff policy, 2019-2024. And their conclusion was that Pakistan is the most, the highest protected country in the world. I mean, the highest tariffs. So that means that neither any investment can come in, nor we can be part of, you in the earlier part you discussed about this global value chains. Global value chains means that you have to let things come in, process, they go back. And with such high tariffs, it's not likely that to happen. So what our emphasis has been that, okay, we produce cotton locally and we rely on cotton, but cotton is, the rest of the world demands other things like electrical goods and other things, and not just cotton-based goods. I mean, this is a very small. Now, in this global value chains, almost 50 to 70% of global trade takes place through global value chains. And mostly it's trade between multinational companies. They have a branch one in Korea, one in China, one here, there. So that takes place, and we are completely out of it. So unless we reform our tariff policy, I don't think we get anywhere. And one other thing, you see, if you look at, as Ali was just saying, that other countries, they collect taxes on their domestic activity. So taxes from international trade are less than 5%. In case of Pakistan, it's 45 to 50%. So it's a huge distortion. So we have to really correct this.
Right, access to capital, the second pillar that you've just mentioned. How this can be made smooth, the access or the capital, and specifically to whom?
Well, there are, at least there are 2 modes of doing it. First of all, we can raise access to capital through equity. For instance, by making the Pakistan Stock Exchange more dynamic, more inclusive, more open to investors, and making it easier for new IPOs, for new industrial companies to actually raise capital through stock exchange, through public offerings. Secondly, of course, we have the banking mechanism, and here, unfortunately, 75 to 80% of current commercial credit goes to the government. And so, if the banks have the option of a risk-free lending, then there will not be enough capital to be borrowed by the private sector, and whatever is left of the capital is largely consumed by the large players, by the incumbent. So it doesn't. So we need a diversification. And thirdly, we had a mixed experience, but maybe it's need to be re-looked at. For instance, specialized financial instruments, institutions of providing credit to I would not say sectors, but I would say competitive technologies, products, or even aspiring companies. So we need some proactive measures so that the inadequacy of the capital can be replaced by diversification and provision of capital from all these sources to the private sector.
The third one, the quality of human resource development. What's required for that? More
Well,
educational institutions, the expertise and the exchange of knowledge?
First of all, look, our existing public resources, let's say, the Higher Education Commission or the universities, I think, frankly, we need to really scrap a significant part of the budget we are spending on the universities in the public sector and make a major shift to the technical and vocational institutions. Higher education, to me, is a luxury. We need good primary education to be funded by the government, but the pursuit of higher education should be left primarily to the individuals, and the state should actually step back from it. And instead, the state should redirect its resources to a better quality technical and vocational institutions, which we are not doing. So if when we start doing this diversion or reallocation of resources, I'm very sure that we will see some changes.
Right. Let me take Dr. Ahmad's view on this. Higher education is a luxury, as per the understanding of Mr. Salman. What's your take? And he wants the government to take a step back when it comes to the individual going for the higher education, and more focus should be on the vocational and technical training.
Yes, I agree with, because I think first you have to have a strong base. I mean, the high school education should be really, really good, because in most countries, higher education, the ratio of students getting high school is much, much higher, and compared to higher education. So this should be the real base, strong base, and then we should have much more emphasis on technical education than just general education, the way it is. So yeah, I agree with that.
Development of organic clusters. You said that they should be built organically through an organic scheme. How is that doable?
So for instance, if you look at the landscape of Pakistan, there are about 70 organically existing clusters in the country already. For instance, you have fans cluster, you have cutlery, you have bangles in Hyderabad. You have these clusters which people have developed themselves without any policy, without any government support, and this happened historically, decades. You have football, in Sialkot, for instance, sports goods. You have you will find these clusters everywhere.
Pace of those could have been very slow as compared to what is required at the moment to
so
meet that particular demand.
Actually, if you go inside those clusters, you will find gaps. You will find, for instance, they are not. The access to technology is quite outdated. You will there are studies around that. Engineering Development Board could have played a much important role there by bringing better technology to these clusters, and also again the issue of the connectivity, the issue of the participation in the global value chain, which Dr. Manzoor mentioned, is important. So if you talk to those players who and most of the players in those clusters are SMEs, they will lead you to the solutions. The policy is not the solution. Actually, those people will tell you the solution.
So what could be the scheme of their formation in an organic way? I mean, when you talk about these and the problems that you've also mentioned, which are associated with those 70 organically formed clusters, to get added into those global value chains, right? So the kind of pace that the world is going on right now. So what do you mean when you talk of these clusters being formed in an organic way?
So
what is that organic way at this particular time, keeping that very pace? or the modern times in view in
So
particular?
I'll give you two contrasting examples. One example is of Sialkot, and people and the industrialists and the firms of Sialkot have done it themselves. They have developed their own airport, their own warehouses, their own dry ports, and own significant investment in the roads, which connects them to the international market, right? Contrast this with, for instance, in the vegetable and fruits clusters in near Dera Ismail Khan, which only have recently been connected with the CPEC, but it's very recent. It's not really, we don't see the.
But it has been connected.
But it has been recently, yeah, exactly. So there the government can actually help, for instance, by developing processing facilities, helping the date growers in Pangjur. There was a
But the
recent
potential is
investment.
there, of course,
So
because there is a connection that has been developed
There was
now.
a recently, last year, UAE invested heavily. It's about a $700 million investment which went into this date, palm and date processing facility in Balochistan. It is a great example of where you invest more in existing facilities and help them grow into international markets.
Right, Dr. Ahmad, now the formation of these clusters in organic way, what's your understanding of that?
Well, I think we need to move beyond what we have been doing. For example, we need to have our own brands. I mean, we sell for years and years, historically, even for Pakistan, selling our, we make something and we send it to Germany, so they polish it and give their brand and sell it, at least 5 to 10 times more cost. So if we had our own brand, we could have, get more value for this. This is one thing. Second is our standards are, many of our goods are unable to meet the international standards. So the government could do something to improve those standards so that the substandard goods do not.
Like, for example, what could be done in that regard in order to increase the standard?
Almost all developed countries, they have certain standards for a finished product to come into their country. But the cost of, for an individual SME or even a bigger unit to get through that is quite high. So they don't get into that. They send the raw material and semi-finished product and then get it finished there. So if we could have done this here, this would make. But because of lack of resources, and the government didn't really intervene in that, they could have been improved on this thing. Standards, then the technical, what else could be there? And for example, this case of dates, that reminds me of another thing. UAE is spending 700 million. Okay, our biggest export destination was India. Now we have shut up exporting to India. So we have to send our dates back to somewhere in the Middle East, and from there they go to India, and that adds a lot of cost. So we have to see all the way through, okay, the 700 million, but how do we recover that? This is by opening up trade, and we are not doing that.
Right. The last point, the last period that you already mentioned, regulation. Please go ahead.
So there are various parts of it. For instance, there the quality of environment regulations, the quality of labor laws, but also to give you one recent example is the access to forex. Right? So we impose significant restrictions in the last couple of years only to our detriment and disadvantage. So the access to forex exchange should be liberalized, and this should not have to go through the long like the approvals like ECC and all that. We also need to make sure that while the environmental protection is important, these do not become as obstacle in growing of business. So these are the regulations which we need to relook, and frankly speaking, while SIFC, I think that the intent is there, but unless we revamp these regulations, just administrative fixing will not take us far.
Right. Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, now we have seen the Finance Ministry saying there have been proposals made in order to restructure the Federal Board of Revenue. What measures so far have been taken in that regard, and how important is, what is actually the need of revamping the Federal Board of Revenue?
Okay. What is the need? The need is that we raise very little revenue, from 8 to 9% of our GDP. So this is not enough to meet our expenses. And as a result, we have to get into debt, borrow more and more and more. So we have to at least double this current from 8 to about 15%. So we need a more dynamic organization, because the current organization is too, I should say, too big to reform. So what they are proposing is, now I come to what are the major proposals. They are proposing to have two distinct boards, one for customs and the other is for international taxes and all those things with international trade, and the other is collection of domestic taxes. Now the whole world realized this, and that's why about 75 to 80% of countries have two different, customs is different and direct tax is different. And only some least developed countries have this, some Africa countries which had some colonial structure from British days, and UK itself. But UK has done something else. What UK has done is that from their customs, they've taken the enforcement function and given set up another organization. And also they don't collect too much customs duty, because they let trade flow. Maybe out of they collect something like 800,000 pounds. And the customs duty is maybe only 5 billion. It's not even 1% of the total. So for them, but it's only least developed countries. Otherwise, if you look at any, for example, India did it almost, I don't know, 30, 40 years ago, because they realized that the two organizations have a different function, so separate. And it's the same thing with China, with Malaysia, with any country that you take, any forward-looking country. Because they realize that if they put customs in the same department, there's too much emphasis on revenue for customs, and they ignore their other functions like exports and like trade facilitation, etc. So this is the second. The third is they want to separate the day-to-day work of the departments, revenue collection, from policy making. Because if you have the same people making policy, say, if the same member customs are chairman, he says, okay, we have to collect 200 billion more, so let's put 5% more tax on this and 10% more on this. This is conflict of interest. This is not they don't consider all big implications of this. So it's important that policy making function should be separated from actual day-to-day work. So these are the three main features of this.
Right, Mr. Ali, your understanding of it. How do you think there is a dire need of reforming and restructuring the Federal Board of Revenue? As per your understanding, what are those reasons, if your answer is yes?
Well, we certainly need to revamp the taxation structure. But in addition to the administrative measures which Dr. Manzoor has referred to, I would like to add that unless we also reform and revamp the tax policy itself, just administrative restructuring would not be effective in achieving the goals of better taxation or diversification of taxation resources, or even increasing the portion of the direct taxation. And for that, we have been arguing, as earlier discussed also, that we need to move to a low rate and broad-based taxation structure. Right now, the rates of taxation, the rates of tariff, the rates of income tax, the rates of general sales tax are too high for our level of economic activity and our level of economic development. And these needs to be brought down so that we can encourage more businesses to join the tax payers, and then we can expect to actually go further in terms of development, in terms of the better taxation culture.
Right. Now, there's been a mention of rationalizing and streamlining the functions of Federal Board of Revenue. When we specifically try to understand these two terminologies, rationalizing and streamlining of the Federal Board of Revenue in order to increase its efficiency, function, and the effectiveness, could you shed a little bit of light on that?
Well, I think I would be able to comment maybe in terms of let's say the tax policy itself. Take the example of the general sales tax. Right? So we have a sort of anomaly that we have a different structure for a federal level collection of the GST, and we have a different structure for provincial levels. So we have this discrimination between goods and services. We have problems of origin of GST. I know that there have been some reforms, or at least attempts to reform to remove these distortions and streamline the taxation, but I think ultimately we need to move to a harmonized sales tax structure, whether in terms of the origin or in terms of the federal and provincial governments. So therefore, this direction, I believe, would be more helpful in achieving the objective.
Right, Dr. Ahmad, your last quick comments regarding, as you mentioned, there happens to be a conflict of interest when it comes to the overall functioning, where that particular conflict of interest happens to be a hurdle. And do you think after this restructuring process that is ongoing, it would be completely overcome?
Well, I don't think it will be completely over, because there's oversight by the finance minister on this, and so maybe if the government of the day wants something, perhaps there would be a little bit of a conflict of interest, because it's not completely independent. There is. But there's one or two other features of this reform process. One, they want to bring far more use of information technology. And the FBR's side department, PRAL, what they call it, and they want to reform that, so that there's far more emphasis on these data collection. And already on the customs side, they've very successfully done it through Pakistan Single Window, where all these departments have been connected, and they want to do something similar on the income tax side.
And what's the second one?
Oh, information technology, I was saying that they want to bring. And then, yes, the second one, sorry. There will be, for all the two boards that they intend to create on both on customs side as well as from the domestic, they will be overseen by a board, a board consisting of experts from even their own the customs and income tax, plus businesses, plus the relevant other government ministries.
Dr. Manzoor Ahmad, Memeber Task Force on FBR and Tax Reform, thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Ali Salman, Economist, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.